Hey Lake Point, Pastor Mike here to get you caught up on the final week of our series, Becoming a World Christian. A series designed to help us better understand God's heart for our world. And this week, Pastor Nate told us we're all rich and greedy, but he did it nicely. Now, it can be awkward talking about money in church. A lot of people wrongly think that the church only cares about getting their money. However, that's simply not the case. If we want to understand God's heart for the world, it necessitates that we look at how God has asked us to steward our resources. God has blessed us to be a blessing, which means there's a responsibility that comes with being wealthy. We often think of salvation as a rebirth, and it very much is, but it's also a redistribution, where those who are rich give to those who are poor. Consider the letter the Apostle Paul wrote to his protege Timothy. Timothy served as Paul's representative to a number of churches that Paul had planted. Timothy was in charge of preaching to the people in these churches. Now, it's important to note that many of these churches were port cities that ring the Mediterranean Sea. Port cities were epicenters of trade and wealth. And as such, Paul knew that many of the people who became followers of Christ and started attending these churches were well off. They were what we would call rich. And it is for this reason that Paul writes these words found in 1 Timothy chapter 6, verse 17. He says, "Command those who are rich in this present world not to be arrogant, nor to put their hope in wealth." Now, it would be easy to stop right there and say, whew, glad Paul's not talking to me, because most of us don't think of ourselves as rich. According to a Gallup poll in which they surveyed people from across different socioeconomic groups, the average North American, regardless of income, defined rich as someone who makes double what they make. In other words, when they interviewed people who earn $30,000 a year, that group defined rich as someone who earned $60,000 a year. And when they interviewed people who made $60,000 a year, the magic number for them was rich was $120K a year. Everyone does this, including millionaires. But the reality is that all of us are rich. Only 1% of the world's population makes more than $90 a day, which means that if you're watching this and you make minimum wage or better and you work 30 hours a week, you are part of that 1%. You probably don't think of yourself as Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk, but that's how the rest of the world sees you. North Americans alive right now are the richest people in the history of our world. All right, back to Paul's letter. Paul says, "Command those who are rich in this present world not to be arrogant, nor to put their hope in wealth, which is so uncertain." Paul says that money does two things to people. First off, money makes us arrogant and proud. And the definition of arrogance is to have an inflated sense of self-worth. You see yourself better than other people. And it's easy to see how wealth does this to us. Human nature tells us that our identities are defined by our possessions. And so when your net worth inflates, it only makes your sense of self-worth inflate too. As such, it's no surprise that being rich can cause you to become arrogant. But that's not all that wealth does to you. Paul also warns Timothy about a second tendency rich people have, and that's to put their hope in their wealth. Once again, this is easy to do. When you have money, it's easy to put your hope and your trust in it rather than God, leaving us with the illusion that we are self-sufficient, that we don't really need God. But money doesn't do you a lot of good when you learn you have stage 4 cancer or that your fiance just cheated on you. Not everything can be fixed by money. It's why it's dangerous to put your hope in your wealth, which is why Paul tells Timothy to tell these rich people to command those who are rich in this present world not to be arrogant, nor to put their hope in wealth, which is so uncertain, but to put their hope in God, who richly provides us with everything for our enjoyment. Instead of trusting in wealth, which is unreliable, Paul instructs Timothy to teach his followers to trust in God, who richly provides us with everything for our enjoyment. He then informs Timothy about the antidote to the proud and self-sufficient heart. He writes this in verse 18. He says, "Tell them to use their money to do good. They should be rich in good works and generous to those in need, always being ready to share with others." All right, conviction time. Remember I shared here in North America, we are amongst the richest people who have ever lived on this planet? Well, according to recent statistics made available by the Canadian government, Canadian generosity has declined annually over the past 30 years. Canadians are becoming less generous over time. Ironically, stats show that immigrants don't donate more to charity on average than Canadian-born citizens of the same economic class. Only 1 in 5 Canadians donated to a registered charity in 2019. And the average Canadian donates only 0.54% of their household income to charity. Even though Canadians are in the top 1% of the richest people on the earth, we donate less than 1% of our income to charity. That's rough. And unfortunately, as Nate shared, Christians aren't much above the average. On average, Canadian Christians donate 2.5% of their household income to charity, 2% to their church, and about 0.5% to other charities. Just to put that in perspective, during the Great Depression, when the average standard of living was obviously much worse, the average Canadian donated 3.3% of their income. So even though our standard of living has increased exponentially, our standard of giving has not. That's not depressing enough. Of the 2% that goes to the local church, only about 2% of that on average goes to global missions. So only about 2% of 2% actually goes to making a difference around the world, even though we are one of the richest nations in the world. I think it's fair to say we have a problem. We are blind to how rich we are, and we are blind to how greedy we are. Jesus talked about money more than any other topic, and he taught his followers a rather interesting definition of greed. He said that greed is the assumption that everything placed in our hands is for our own consumption. But it's not. As we've been saying all throughout this series, the truth is that we've been blessed to be a blessing. That salvation is more than just a rebirth, it's a redistribution where God radically reorients our hearts to be others focused, in which we give generously to those in need. It's why 2,000 years ago, the Apostle Paul said that we should be rich in good works and generous to those in need, always being ready to share with others. Here at Lake Point, we want to take this command seriously. We want to be world Christians where we share God's heart for our world, where we do good and we help those in need. It's why we give away $500,000 of our income annually, and it's why we're partnering with global workers and organizations who are working to bless the least reached and the most vulnerable of our world. As Canadians, we tend to think we are generous, but the stats say that we give spontaneously, sporadically, and sparingly. We usually only give in moments of inspiration, when our hearts are emotionally engaged, like during Christmas time, or when we hear a heart-wrenching story of a person in need. But as Nate shared, to truly be generous, you have to have a plan. Here at Lake Point, many of us follow the 3P plan. What's the 3P plan? Well, the first P stands for priority. Generosity won't happen unless you make it a priority. If you wait until you have more money, you'll never start, because rich people live in denial that they're rich. The best way to make giving a priority is to make it the first payment you make every single week. Before the mortgage, before the groceries, before savings, whatever the amount, do it first, the moment you receive your paycheck. This not only ensures that you'll guard it as a priority, but it's a symbolic way of reminding you where your hope lies. Those who give what is left over at the end of the month see themselves as responsible for meeting their own needs. Those who give off the top, though, at the beginning of the month, see everything as belonging to God, including the responsibility to meet their daily needs. The second P stands for percentage. Don't just make generosity a priority, but base it off of a percentage. Percentages are important for a number of reasons. The most important being that a percentage is black and white, and it's actually easy to measure. As such, it gives you a much better reflection of whether you have control of your money or whether your money has control of you. Plus, it reveals how generous you truly are. Some people say, well, I don't give based on percentage, I just give based on an amount. The problem with that is that your income is going to change from year to year. The other problem with that is an amount doesn't determine if you are generous or not. I mean, if Warren Buffett gave $10,000 to charity last year, would that be generous? No, not really, because his net worth is $102 billion. Generosity is much better reflected by making it a priority and by picking a percentage. The third P stands for making it progressive. What's that mean? Well, to be progressive simply means that over time you raise the percentage. As your financial situation changes throughout life and your relationship with God grows, change your giving percentage along with it. Well, friends, thank you so much for listening. I hope this message challenged and inspired you. I'll see you next series.